Alright, what is up YouTube? So today I'm going to be talking about the best hand traps in the December 2020 format. I feel like there was a lot of hand traps that are better in this format. There's a lot of hand traps that are worse in this format. And I kind of want to cover all of the hand traps that are kind of relevant or were relevant in the past. And kind of, show you guys what the best hand traps, what hand traps are kind of low-key, kind of good, and kind of tell you what's like really terrible, because there's a lot of very terrible hand traps in the format right now because of the meta shift with Eldritch becoming a top tier deck. We have Virtual Worlds being the best deck. We have Drytrons also being in the format. So let's just talk about the best hand traps in today's format. So first one is the Artifact Lancia. I think this is a S tier hand trap. It is really good against Eldritch and Virtual Worlds, which are two of the best decks, or the best performing decks. And it's also searchable in Drytrons because it's a fairy, so you have the utility of being able to add it to the hand. Also, playing it at 3 is like really good because Virtual Worlds, as I said before, is probably going to be the most represented deck, as well as Eldritch. So having this card, even in the main deck, is just very, very strong. Also really good against evenly match as well, if you really want to do that, but most of the time it's against VW and Eldritch. It can also be used against dinos if you ever face them, but I feel like dinosaurs are kind of falling off because of Eldritch and Virtual Worlds, but Artifact Lancia does indeed stop dinos in their track, at least from summoning Ultimate Conductor with Pill Effect. So, next card we're going to talk about is the Ghostburner. Any of these Valor cards, I'm going to put them all in the D tier. I think that Ghostburner, Imperm, Valor, they're not, well, they're pretty bad. Like, they're not really good in this format. The only reason I can see you ever playing any of these three cards is to stop something like Verte and Anaconda. Anything else is like kind of bad, or something very, very specific. Otherwise, like, these cards are just very bad against Eldritch, it's very bad against Virtual Worlds, it's very bad against Drytron. It's not that bad against Zodiac, but then again, like, these cards are just not that good. They're not good against any of the top 5 decks of the format, so they're D tier. They have their uses though, which is why they're not in the F tier. The next card is a card that a lot of people probably don't know about, and there's been some kind of talk about it, and that is Ally of Justice Cycle Reader. This card was used in the ABC format to banish the ABC pieces from the graveyard. It's also decent in other formats, but this card is actually really good against Drytrons, also Eldritch, because you could banish the Golden Lord from graveyard, or you could banish the Drytrons from the graveyard as well. I'm gonna put this in the B tier. I think this is really solid. It could possibly be in the A tier, but it's just not seeing play right now, and I think it's only really good against those two specific decks. And with having a format that's like kind of diverse, it's kind of hard to have these kind of reads on top decks, because you might just face against Rogue like half of the time, and then this card is like pretty dead against most Rogue besides like ABC. But besides that, it's a really good card. It's definitely really strong against, the matchup that it's good against. But then again, it's just, it's not making the cut from being A and, S tier. And it's also really bad against the best deck of the format, the best performing and, the deck to beat, and that is Virtual World. So, really decent. The only thing keeping this from S and A tier is just like, it's really, really matchup dependent. Next up is Ash Blossom, the best hand trap in the game right now. Currently, everybody's running this card. If you're not, you're doing something terribly wrong, because this is good against pretty much everything. There's not really much to explain about this card. It stops a lot of things in the format. It stops a lot, and that is what's good about some of these hand traps, is that they're not necessarily super impactful in terms of power, but when you have a card that's very generic and stops a lot of different cards in the format, it's just generally like one of the best hand traps in the format. Next up is Cipher and Gear Gamma. I think this is a A tier card. The reason why I'm not going to put this in the S tier is because we have a lot of trap decks in the format, and it's kind of dead against those decks. I mean, you can negate monster effects like Lord, you can negate that. Like a Marionetter, you can negate that. Guru, you can negate that, but it's not really doing anything to stop their trap cards. Like, the most important cards in their deck is the trap cards, and if you're not stopping that, you're pretty much not in a good spot. I mean, this card is still good against Virtual World, it's still good against Drytron, it's still good against Dinosaurs, it's still good against, a bunch of these different combo decks, but against trap decks, it's just not that good. But it still has its uses versus trap decks, so that is why it's in the A tier and not like in the B tier. And it's also why it's not in the S tier. Next up is DD Crow. I'm gonna put this in the A tier. I think this card is pretty decent overall. I think it's better than Cycle Reader, which is why I put it above in the A tier. Or even if I had to, I'd put like this in the C tier. Put DD Crow in the B tier. You know what? I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna put this in the B tier because I don't think Gamma and DD Crow is the same tier. So I'm gonna say DD Crow is definitely in the B tier. Cycle Reader is definitely in the C tier. I think that DD Crow is just overall just more versatile, which is why it's better than something like Cycle Reader. It can hit a lot of cards, but like Cycle Reader does hit more, which is kind of good. But overall, DD Crow crowing, Eldritch Trap or Virtual World in the graveyard, or their Virtual World spelling trap cards in the graveyard, or hitting a Drytron in the graveyard. Like, this is generally pretty good. Even against something like Zoo, you can, hit something with like Chakanine, chain this, hit the card they're trying to summon, or Tiger Mortar, they try to attach something from the graveyard. You can DD Crow that as well. So it's pretty decent around the whole, board, but it's just not strong enough like, Gamma, Artifact Lancia, and Ash Blossom. So it's definitely a B tier card. The next card I want to talk about is Skullmeister. I think this card is a A tier card. It's really good against Virtual World. It's really good against Drytron. It's really good against Eldritch. Generally, these cards that are very good against the top 3 decks is going to be a good hand trap in the format. It's also good against Prank Kids, which all of their cards activate in the graveyard, at least the main deck of monsters, which is very, very powerful. And there's just a lot of graveyard effects in the format, so having something like Skullmeister being able to negate it, like Ash Blossom, but not negate the activation, is pretty good. I don't think there's any other uses for it. I think it's just very solid to just stop those cards. So not letting them plus more from these cards is just really powerful. Next up is Ghost Bell in Haunted Mansion. Now, I've been hyping up this card a lot because I think this card is very strong. And I'm going to put it in the S tier. I think it's really solid against everything across the board, plus more. You have stuff like Nadir's Servant that spells summons from the graveyard, which is pretty strong. A lot of people probably don't know if you're not, high rated or, paying attention to the meta. But this card stops a lot of different things like that. It stops, Nadir's Servant, it stops Virtual Worlds, Drytron, you name it. Like, this card is just very versatile in what the cards stop. It also stops DD Crow. It also stops Cycle Reader. Like, this card is just very good, being able to just stop a bunch of different graveyard effects. So Bell, definitely a very strong card. Next up is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. I'm gonna put this in the D tier. I don't think it's that good. I mean, it's just like these cards. Like, it might be good against certain cards, but overall against the meta, it's not really that good. I mean, Ogring as Zeus is not that bad. Ogring like Dryden is not that bad. Ogring Satellite. You know what? I'm gonna put this in the C tier because I think it has some uses. It's not as terrible as these ones, but you can hit like a Satellite Warrior, or what is it? Charge Warrior. You can hit that as well. Croc. You could like hit the VFD if you really want to. It has uses, but it's just like not that good because we don't have stuff like Dragon Link and Infernobles. Generally, the combo deck's really hard to lose to something like Ogre, as well as field spells or continuous spells, or monsters that need to stick on the board. So Ogre definitely good against Zodiac, but other than that, like Ghost Ogre, it's just not that good. I definitely don't think it's as good as something like DD Crow that has a lot of uses and potential. Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. I'm going to put this in the C tier as well. You can hit like a VFD. You can hit stuff like the Zeus, which is really powerful. You can hit something like the Herald, the extra deck Herald monster. You can also hit Union Carrier as well. You can hit a lot of cards in the format. It's just generally not good because if you're playing Cherries, you're probably playing like a deck that has a lot of space in the extra deck. And if you have a lot of space in the extra deck, you're probably playing Extravagance. And if you're playing Extravagance, you probably don't want to play, Cherries in Extravagance. Kind of conflicts. So Cherries is just in a weird spot, but if you're playing in like a mirror match, like virtual world mirror match, and you drop a Cherries, like you're feeling pretty good. Or if you're playing in the Drytron mirror, you can Cherries, hit, Union Carrier or something like that. That's pretty good. Um, so it's just generally a good hand trap, but finding the space for this, and also this is like a dead top deck, so that's just. Whew. Having a dead top deck like this is just pretty bad. Again, to another hand trap that's like that, but uh, generally Cherries it's very meta call like when it comes to this card. Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. How the mighty has fallen. This card is a F tier card. There's not any link summoning at all besides like maybe Drytron. This card is like not that good. Like you don't have like Isolde right now in the format. I mean, it's probably in the Rogue tier, or Dragon Link. But generally, if you don't want to waste your space on having a Phantasme when something else like Ash, Bell, Lancia, Gamma, Skullmeister are just generally more versatile. And this card used to be $100 card, but right now it's just super bad. Like you don't want to play Phantasmate. It's dead versus like pretty much every deck that is top tier right now. Next up is Gnome Material or Gnome Material. I'm gonna put this in the B tier. I think it's really solid. Again, it suffers from the syndrome of being really bad. I'm putting this in the C tier because I think these are in like the same kind of tier. They're really solid against a lot of, specific matchups, but it's just generally bad to draw, or it's just generally not that good against like a lot of different matchups. So like having this card, it's decent. It's definitely a good meta call, as I said before, with something like Cherries. But go Gnome Material or No Material, it's just such a terrible top deck to even consider this card, unless you're playing like a specific against a specific combo deck. You're just not really wanting to use this card. Next up is the Herald cards. Herald of Orange, Herald of Purple, and the Herald of the Spell one. I think these cards are definitely pretty good. I think the Orange Light and the Purple are the best ones. The Spell one it's not really that good. I mean, it can hit like Talent. It can maybe hit Droplets if they don't, discard a monster. But overall, the Spell one is pretty bad. I know a lot of people are kind of like mentioning this one, but the best ones are definitely Herald of Orange and Herald of Purple. Trap cards are really solid in the format right now. There's a lot of trap decks, so that's really good. And then Orange Light is just like it's the best of both worlds. It's good as being a hand trap. It is also really good as being like a disruption. So it's just really solid as a card. And that is why both of these cards are like in the A tier or in the S tier. Besides that, they're not really used in any other decks. You're probably just playing this in Drytrons. I mean, maybe like Madolche, but like then again, not really good. I guess like Fluffles as well can play these two cards. But generally, you're probably playing this in Drytron. There's not any other deck you're playing this in. Sarvis, this is another card that's like super specific. Like, unless you're trying to stop a, really powerful card against your deck, probably not gonna play Sarvis or Sarvis, whatever this card is called. And yeah, it's just generally not worth the brick. So it's like super specific. It's not really that. I mean, it's decent. I mean, you can stop like a punishment. You can stop like imperm if they, cards like that. But like generally, it's just not that good right now. I know a lot of people are considering this because you can search it with the oh, Drytron can search any ritual card. Lol. But yeah, it's not good. Droll and Lockbird. This card is it's either an A or an S tier. I'm gonna put this or A or B tier. I'm gonna put this in the B tier. I think it's very solid, but like unless you're playing Drytrons, it's not really hurting you that much. So it definitely it's like very good against Drytron, but Virtual World, I mean, they desires you drop a droll, like they can't activate Lulu, they can't activate the Quinlong or whatever the spell is called. Um, Eldritch, they don't really care. Like they search like once with like Curse Eldland. They may be extravagance into Curse Eldland, you can stop the Eldland. Um, but besides that, like Zoo don't really care. I mean, I guess Tenki to into Desires and stops that as well, but generally Droll is pretty good against Drytron. It's pretty decent against, Virtual Worlds and Zodiac. Not really good against Eldritch, but overall, really good against Drytron, which is why it's in the B tier. Um, so yeah, it's really good against a lot of rogue matchups as well. Like if you're playing against, I guess like Mermail or something like that, like it's really powerful against that. Retaliating C, I'm gonna put this. I'm gonna put this in the C tier. I think it's like, you know what? I'm gonna put this. I think it's generally better than any of these cards in the D tier, but it's super specific. As like all of these cards, like in the C tier, are like super specific, but are much better than the D tier cards that are just not very good. I think Retaliating C is just really good to kind of banish the Drytrons in the graveyard if they ritual spell. I believe you can activate this on the ritual spells. If not, this is probably a D tier. But this is generally like a meta call. It's also good against Stalls if you really wanted to play that. It's like super hyper specific, but against the matchups, it's like very powerful. And I guess you can search like a Maxi if this is OCG, but that's not really good. DShifter and Nibiru. DShifter, I think, is a solid B tier. The only reason this card is not an S tier or A tier is because like there's not really many decks you can generally play DShifter without hurting your deck. But this card is just, oh my god, it stops turns generally when you drop this card. And if you time this correctly, it can kind of put them in a very terrible spot. So DShifter is just very solid as a card. It's just, I mean, like, it's really bad as a top deck as well. But it's really good against Eldritch. It's really good against like VW. It's really good against Drytron. Like this, like it's so good. But like Gnome Material, like Reaper, it's just like super terrible top deck, and like it's just dead. So really powerful, just really bricky when you draw it as a 6 card, or even further in the game, because a lot of grind games do happen, and if you draw like multiples of these, like it's just not that good, and it's kind of bad against certain decks. So D-Shift and like the Zoo Mirror, like this card is dead. So really good, really solid, just not really that good as a top deck, and just not that good against the mirror match or any deck that's not affected by this, which is not that many. But Zoo is just like one of the tier 1 decks that, or tier 2 decks that just don't really care about this. Then we have Nibiru. I think Nibiru is definitely like still pretty strong. I think it's like the second or a third best hand trap in the game. I think Nibiru is very powerful. Even if we do have a lot of trap cards in the format, there's still like the 2 best decks in the format, Drytron and Virtual World, that get hit by Nibiru, and it's just really solid. It's also good against a lot of rogue decks. You have to realize that you're probably not going to be playing a lot of meta decks like Virtual Worlds and Drytrons, but you might still play against something like Madolches, Mermails. You might play against PKs, like any of these decks, Infernable, Dragon Link. Like these decks, are still in the format. They're still being played at the rogue level, but this card is just way too powerful to put this in the A B tier. Comparatively to something like Gamma, still really solid against, you know, some decks, and this card is dead against trap decks. But Nibiru is such a powerful card against these combo decks like Drytron and Virtual Worlds. It's definitely worth the risk of this being a dead card. At least in the main deck. I mean, like if you're going into a super high level tier, you know, tournament, then having Nibiru in the main doesn't seem that bad. Especially if you're playing something like Shadal's. But it's definitely a guaranteed in the side for a lot of different decks just to stop combo. So that is it, guys. This has been a long video, I know. Kind of just wanted to give you guys what the best hand traps are, because I know a lot of people have been asking me like, hey, what do I run in my deck? Should I run Bell over Ogre, or Bell over Droll, or, you know, Ash over, you know, Gamma, or something like that? Definitely gonna help you into, you know, determining what the best hand traps are in the format and what you can use them against. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I have rambled on long enough. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.